So welcome everyone, and welcome back if you were on the call this morning with us. This is our annual forum, the year-end celebration. I'm Michael Pagel, the Program Manager of Greening Healthcare. And for our event today, there were two sections of it. Part one this morning was our keynote and executive panel. It was a fascinating in-depth discussion into many different aspects of sustainability in healthcare. So that was recorded, and you should definitely review it if you weren't able to join us. This section also will be recorded and posted to our site later this week. So for part two, we're starting off with the Humber River Hospital case study, one of the top performers of hospitals that we found in a massive database. And we'll follow that with a panel discussion on how to move towards net zero emissions. To ask questions during the webinar today, use Q&A button. And for our sponsors, big thank you as always for their support. That's Enbridge Gas and Thermogenic Boilers. Greening Healthcare is run under the nonprofit organization of the Climate Challenge Network, and I believe our technical director, Amdeep Dial, will be joining us for the Humber River case study, and also Ian Jarvis, the executive director, will get us started now. Ian, go ahead.
Thank you, Michael. So for those of you who weren't with us this morning, you missed, as Michael said, a pretty exceptional forward-looking discussion from some really smart people about what sustainable healthcare looks like from an academic, a CEO, a clinician, and an operator of a big healthcare systems perspective. We always value both their willingness to share their ideas and to exchange ideas with each other, and the synergy that comes out of that is great. If you did miss it this morning, then you'll find the recording will be up on the website, Greening Healthcare, shortly. So it's well worth taking in. I plan to do so and take more copious notes than I was able to keep up with this morning. Let me also mention, when you look at the recording, you will hear our acknowledgement of the lands and the Indigenous people of all the lands that we call home these days, and the acknowledgement of the particular Indigenous people, especially within our region of Canada, and the reality that all the work we're doing here is intended to honor their heritage and seek to preserve and protect the lands that we share. So there is a higher meaning, a higher calling to this, which is of great significance to us, and I'm sure to everybody. Our agenda this afternoon, we've got two slices of, again, the idea that we're building the roadmap to the sustainable future on the best of current practice. So we've already got real progress made. We find it through data analytics, but then we drill deeper into what's actually happening in the facilities and the operations and the organizations that are leading the way as to what does low carbon look like within 10 years, and what does net zero look like within 20 or 30 years. So, the whole theme today is around change, the inevitability of change, but trying to get some insight on what exactly that looks like and what it means for individual hospitals wherever they are in that particular journey. So this afternoon, we're looking at Humber River, which is now, we'll show you in international comparisons that we're running. We've got data now from many places in the world, is right at the top of the benchmark chart, and conversation about how, what makes Humber River special, and more importantly, what can be replicated, copied, learned from their experience that allows others then to ideally leapfrog even further along. So we keep engaging and inspiring each other to steady improvement towards low carbon, so that the final step towards net zero is more manageable and more economically practical. Then we've got what I've been looking forward to all day, is a really exceptional international panel of individuals who are going to share their ideas, their insights, their future-looking thoughts around how do we get from the best of today's facilities in terms of energy efficiency and emissions to net zero by 2050. What does that roadmap look like? What does the change management process look like? And this, as far as we can find, will be one of the first real get-togethers to scratch our heads and think about where are we going with this. And again, all of it is intended to link back. We've got a lot of hospitals on this call. What does this mean to you in your day-to-day lives? What's coming down the line? What should you expect? How should you make the adjustmts to doing things profoundly differently that will be necessary to get to net zero? And finally, please stick around, because this is an ongoing conversation, and we will give you a summary of where we're going with greening healthcare in 2022 that continues these themes and is looking to develop new knowledge to track more hospitals, to really leverage the network effect of this group of enthusiastic believers working together to really move the yardsticks forward. So the summary of next year will also have a reference to the International Federation of Healthcare Engineers conference, international in-person conference, which is happening in Toronto in September of 2022. We'll ask Steve Reese to give us a bit of an overview of what that will look like. So this is a kind of a milestone in an ongoing journey towards the imperative of getting to low carbon and net zero. It's a global challenge. It's one that it's not a nice to have. It's one that we absolutely have to resolve, and it's one where everybody has a part to play. And again, we want to build on the backs of giants in terms of work that's already been done and progress that's already been made. So that sets the stage. Let's talk about the Humber River Hospital case study. It gets mentioned quite regularly, and I'm really happy to have along with us to share the story behind the story, what really happened. We have the hospital, we have the developer, and we have the designer. So we've got the three voices. Amandeep, as Michael mentioned, our technical director of Greening Healthcare, he's helped pull the analysis together with a lot of help from the hospital. So we're going to present that story. It will be coming out before the end of the year as a written white paper that will be up on our website and will be distributed widely, I'm sure. And again, for everybody on the line, there are a lot of lessons in here around process and technical issues and design issues and operational issues, which are immensely valuable to everybody as you track your own practical pathways towards the low carbon future. So welcome, Grace, from the hospital. Kurt, welcome back, and thanks for all your contributions to greening healthcare over the year. Kurt's a principal with Smith & Anderson, the mechanical electrical design engineers. And welcome to Alexander, with Plenary Americas, the developer of the facility. They all have their own perspective on the same story, and we're really looking forward to hearing that as it works its way through this afternoon. So let's get rolling. So Humber River Hospital, as Michael said earlier, thanks again to Sustainable Buildings Canada for providing some funding support to this work. Thanks to the IESO, Save on Energy, also providing contributions to parts of this work, and to our program sponsors with Enbridge and Thermogenics Boilers. None of this is possible without your help, so it's always appreciated. And let's run through the intent here. There's 4 bits of the story. One is a world-class facility has been achieved. Many have attempted it. We've now got 18 operational, relatively new P3 hospitals running in Ontario. This is by far the leader to date in terms of energy efficiency and emissions. But there's another 30 that are following along behind these ones, each one of which is enviously buying Humber River's position there and looking to beat them. And that's exactly the dynamic that we all hope to create. Correct. We want to give you a bit of an economic and environmental summary of just how significant Humber River's achievement is, and we want to we want to show you the operational performance from the day it opened its doors and how much it's improved since. It started as the most efficient major acute care hospital in our database, and has improved by 25% since then. So that's how far it's moved the yardsticks forward. And then we want to get a bit deeper in with Amandeep and and all of our panelists around cause and effect. What are the attributes, what are the characteristics of design and operations that have really had the effect to make this so much more efficient than other hospitals like it? So again, we'll come back to this at the end of this afternoon session, but Greening Healthcare is engaged in a global search for the most efficient hospitals out there, in the belief that the starting point for our progression towards net zero has to be with the best of the bunch that we've got already. So this is very simply energy intensity, weather normalized to the city of Toronto. We can weather normalize to anywhere you like. When we looked at this with Richard previously, we could weather normalize it to somewhere in the UK, so people can relate to where their numbers lie. The benchmark shape stays the same. Individual hospitals move around as the weather adjustment takes effect. But essentially, this is a global database which is growing every month right now as we invite healthcare organizations around the world to send us your best. So when we get the best, sometimes they don't look that good after all. But sometimes they show up right at the top of the chart and they bump somebody else out, and then you're going to have to work a little bit harder to restore your vantage point in there. But the whole intention of this analysis that we intend to report back on in September around the IFHE conference is what are the common characteristics of the hospitals at the top of the chart, and then how can we move all of these hospitals to where they are at the top of the chart, and curiously addressing the relatively inefficient hospitals out there right now is the biggest part of the emissions reduction. When we play that together, it gets us more than half of the way to net zero. So improving the efficiency and the heat recovery in existing hospitals is the biggest part of our challenge, and it's something we already know how to do. So it's how do we help the hospitals in the lower part of this chart to improve, to achieve close to the levels of the hospitals at the top? That is job one. So number two in this list is Humber River. And Richard, it's a UK hospital that's actually number one at the moment, and we're going to be spending time with you and your friends at the NHS examining what makes that particular hospital special. And this morning, you can look at the recording, we listed the top 20, and you can see exactly who they were. There's hospitals from the US, from Canada, from the UK within that group. And again, that's our starting point. That's if we can get from there to net zero, but getting everybody to that level of performance is where this world begins. As far as so let me pause there for a minute, though, if I may. And let's pick up Grace. We had a few comments from Barbara this morning about how not just the international profile, but how the high performance of Humber River plays out with people who are working within the hospital. Perhaps you can elaborate on this. Perhaps a sense of pride. It makes you feel good being part of something that worked that good, worked that well. But also the board's senior management. Can you give us a sense of how does Humber River feel about itself and all the recognition it's getting through this?
Thank you, Ian. Obviously, we're very proud to be where we are, but as Barb mentioned earlier in the morning, this is by no accident. This has been our vision from day one, from the inception of the project. When we started planning the project, we're thinking about not just adding the hospital services to the community, but also benefit the community in many other ways, including minimizing environmental impact. Setting the bar high is very important. I think we're proud to be where we are, but our next question is, how do we continue to make improvement and do better? Throughout this journey, what we learned is that having a very clear vision from the start, and having the support from senior leadership, and really make an effort into creating an efficient design, having an efficient building, and more importantly is to optimize the operation utilize the contract mechanism under the AFP model to ensure the continuous high performance.
So all we have to figure out now is how to charge for admission for all the tours that are coming through to see how you did what you did, and it becomes a really sustainable hospital. Alex, let me pick up with you for a second, if I could, both in terms of the challenges of getting to this point, because there's nothing easy about this, and I know that Plenary went through their own economic, financial, administrative challenges around this, but again, also what it means to Plenary. Is it helpful for you? Are you using the Humber? Are you able to use the Humber River results to drive progress across all the areas of the world where you operate?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Ian. So I think I have to start by really clearly stating that any sort of success at any of our sites, but Humber in particular, really is based on the contributions from all the parties, and especially in a DBFM type structure, the design, build, finance, maintain P3 structure that Barb did quite a good job this morning, Barb Collins, sort of providing a nice overview of. There are many parties involved there, right? And for those kind of unfamiliar with the structure, there's the project company that I represent at Humber, working with design builders, with the operators, and everyone, they're leading minds at every level that not only work together on this project, but actually work together across portfolios, right? And successes here are brought to other sites, and successes at other sites are brought here. And from the design builder side, we had PCL and Smith and Anderson and others representing that phase of the work, and then Johnson Controls currently in the operator role, and that all parties continue to be engaged and really bring lessons learned and best practices every day to the site, and new technologies and new approaches. So it's a continual learning environment, and then really Humber as a public partner with Infrastructure Ontario advising and driving that kind of contractual framework that we work within. Like, all parties really are working together to enable the success through the various mechanisms. So kind of back to your question specifically, the success that we're seeing at Humber, and which Greening Healthcare is really helping to document, really sets a line in the sand of what's possible in that kind of DBFM realm of really targeting and addressing what's a well-observed kind of energy performance gap in public infrastructure and public buildings in many respects, and the bundling of the various phases of a project across the building life cycle, from bid through design and construction and operations, is really an amazing opportunity to drive this really remarkable performance, and it is in many respects unique to that DBFM model, and that's truly in the Plenary Americas world, our bread and butter, and our business model is focused on that, because we really see the potential that kind of comes out of that.
And just picking up on other lessons learned from this one that you've been able to carry forward to other Plenary projects that leverage the results.
Yeah, so a lot of it is, and it will really come out, there through the design construction phase. Yes, there's technologies. We're going to speak about smart glass and some other specific technologies as we discuss the case study. But to me, what I really look at is the incredible operational improvements that have occurred over the years of operations. Right? You mentioned that PCL, Smith and Anderson, like the design builders, laid an incredible groundwork, and delivering kind of in early, at substantial completion, a very well-performing hospital with huge potential. but Johnson Controls through this operating phase has operated it very well and continuing to drive for further success and further operational improvements. And a lot of that's incremental. You know, as I believe you mentioned this morning, you know, there's not huge capital investments over that operating term. It's you know, running the equipment better. It's probably one of the single most effective you know, tools that they've added to their toolbox is data analytics, right? And really like looking for micro fault detection and things like that, which is really not sexy stuff, but it's hugely effective. And you know, I think across, again, just looking more broadly at the buildings industry, it's normal, especially with complex modern buildings, that they don't operate well in the first couple of years, right? Like we, in our world, at least we have targets and we have, you know, pain share, gain share mechanisms and things, but it's normal that buildings are in a pain share situation in the first couple of years, and there's huge efforts to just learn the building and make constant improvements to you know, achieve targets and exceed targets. And I think that's really what we've seen at Humber, and is, you know, those lessons are applied across our portfolio for sure.
So let's consider this the kind of executive summary of the case study and get into chapter 1. So what this all means here is looking at the orange line on the total energy box on the left-hand side here. That is what the acute care city hospital top quartile energy target looks like right now. It's 47 equivalent kilowatt hours per square foot per year in the Toronto climate zone. Humber River now in the blue is running at 33.4. So that's the 1 year energy comparison. As far as water consumption is concerned, it's running at about 1/3 less than the greening healthcare target, which is the top quartile of our whole database, which includes old and new facilities. And in greenhouse gas emissions, kilogram per square foot, that is 42% less, and primarily due to lower gas consumption. So this, if you like, becomes a bit of a new milestone, a bit of a new yardstick to compare against. And this is the standard that at this point, other new hospitals in the pipeline are working their way towards. A big deal. Look at that from an economic standpoint, and Bob touched on this a lot this morning. For a hospital of this size and this type, the greening healthcare target, the top quartile of all hospitals, would come in around $8 million a year. Humber River is running at 6.6. Run that over 30 years, and it's close to $100 million of life cycle cost avoidance. And spending some of that $100 million up front to achieve these kinds of numbers clearly makes sense. So for the first time under this DBFM model, we have the opportunity to take a more intelligent economic approach to lifetimes of facilities, and the numbers are huge. So the 30-year life of this hospital, both in terms of utility consumption and utility costs, is a big deal. In terms of greenhouse gas emissions over 30 years, we're avoiding over 100,000 tons. 1,000 tons of greenhouse gas emissions, that's a lot. So yeah, we work really hard to get to 1,000 tons. The idea of 100,000 tons of reduction from one facility. And this is where we get our encouragement that, we can solve this climate crisis thing, damn it. And as Alex has already hinted at, and we'll see more as the story continues, it's not complicated getting there, but it's a lot of hard work. And we have to find a way to roll up our sleeves and make that work happen, because one hospital is great to build upon, but it's 1,000 hospitals which really had the impact. Then we're talking about megatons, and now we're on the global agenda. Alex touched on the fact, and we looked at this a little bit this morning, this is the progression of energy use since the hospital opened, and it opened as at the top of the acute care hospitals in our database. It was already the most efficient to begin with. This is how much it's been improved through thoughtful operations ever since. To read these curves, on the left-hand side is electricity, on the right-hand side is gas. The blue dots are the actual monthly consumptions of electricity and gas right off the bills. The red dots are looking at the baseline and weather normalizing that to the current year operation. So anytime you see a blue dot right on top of a red dot, it's pretty much identical operation and performance to the baseline. Whenever the blue dots are below the red dots, those are real savings, real weather normalized savings. And you can see the trends here. And this, again, every hospital on this call right now should be looking at this and say, I can do that because you can, because you can. We've yet to find a hospital in our database that doesn't have room for improvement in one or more areas of energy usage right now. It's a matter of planning. It's a matter of hard work. It's a matter of starting with a target. And again, we try at Greening Healthcare to make sure every hospital we're involved with knows what its potential is, where to look for savings, and knows how to create this kind of trend line over time. So big deal, 43.4% reduction in gas consumption over that period when it started efficient. This is a big deal. The water trends go up and down. You can see there were issues with water use in the middle, and it's they, as Alex mentioned, they have a very good handle on how things are progressing within the hospital. They have much more granular data even than this, but even monthly data can help you identify when things are going off track, which they were in the middle here, where the blue dots are above the red dots, and getting back on course. So questions to you, how does this work within how the project agreement is managed within the hospital, Grace? Like, what does it look like in terms of performance monitoring? Who looks at this kind of information? How is remedial action identified and implemented clearly, effectively in your case? What is that management process?
So under the project agreement, there are a set of very robust criteria in terms of reporting. So we have monthly reporting. Energy was part of the performance monitoring report every month. This is also a subject in the facility management committee meeting every month. We also have quarterly utility meeting, which I think was held more frequently at the beginning of the project because of the aggressive targets at the beginning. We were all struggling a little bit because this is new. I think I see Laurie's face. Hi, Laurie. At the beginning, Laurie identified that the HVAC schedule is one of the big contributor in terms of less ideal energy performance. So he flagged this concern, and then this was tabled at the utility management committee, and through collaboration with all parties, with plenary facility operator and Smith and Anderson working as a group in a systematic approach. So to align the occupancy schedule with the operating schedule. So that significantly improved the energy performance. That's one of the lessons learned at the beginning, is that you really need to have everybody at the table and work together as a group to improve the operation.
So let's try to, sorry to cut you off, Grace, but so this idea of integrated performance team, the idea of people at the table looking at this, but for all the other hospitals on the line right now, the fact that you pay such close attention to this, but it results in millions of dollars a year in savings. Like it's not that you can't afford to do this, it's you can't afford not to do this. So, this idea that you've got everybody on side, everybody has an incentive to improve, and that drives along. Does that kind of summarize it?
Yes. So I think, we have a project agreement and everybody plays within the framework of the project agreement. But at the same time, it takes coordinated approach to improve the operation. But of course, at the same time, you need to follow your contract requirements in terms of reporting. And also Barb mentioned this morning, it's really worth, from the hospital perspective, it's worth investing in having the resources in place in terms of checking, monitoring, and validating all the data.
That helps a lot. Let's get on to chapter 2. So what we've done here is what Amandeep has done, and I'll ask him to step in here in just a moment, is to compare that again, this greening healthcare target hospital on the right-hand side. So this is a top quartile performer of the whole data set right now, with where Humber River is. So on the electricity part, it breaks it up between base electricity, which is the year-round stuff, the lights, the fans, the medical equipment, the elevators, all the things that run year-round, and then separating out the electricity used for the heat recovery chiller, in this case, the HRC, and the cooling for air conditioning. So we increasingly are able to see not just how efficient Humber River is, but which parts of the energy use pie are particularly good. So this low base electricity use is attributed primarily to ventilation systems and lighting, and we'll come in a moment to Kurt with respect to some of the features of the design that, in our view, were not particularly expensive, had a great payback, and contributed a very significant difference in base electricity use. On the thermal side, it's even more dramatic. The big differences here are the whole usage is 47% lower, but you can see both the base thermal, the biggest part of which in every hospital is air conditioning reheat, and the heating thermal, which is primarily ventilation, just exactly the impact that those things are having in terms of numbers. So even more dramatic on the thermal side, but these are the, if you like, the energy footprint, the energy indicators that we're using to say, what is it about the design and the operation of this facility that makes it special? So the next piece, and I want some thoughts from both Kurt and Grace on this, is scheduling. What the biggest thing from the analysis we've done that sets Humber River apart from everybody else is he just shuts more stuff off more rigorously than anybody else does, but only when it's safe and only when people are there and following all the CSA rules. But when you shut things off, wonderful things happen. Your fan power, you only have to shut a bit of it off to get really big fan power savings. That's base electric. To get really big reheat savings, that's the base thermal. To get really big heating savings, because you're not bringing in all kinds of outside air that has to be conditioned on the way through. What's important about this interval meter chart? So this is 24-hour monitoring of the electric meter on Humber River. And again, we've compared it with the blue, which is another P3 Ontario hospital, about the same vintage, about the same system configuration that doesn't have anything like that degree of scheduling. And while you can see the peak demand there, the difference between the blue and the orange in the peaks, and this is day after day, week after week, is different. That's low static, that's low static fan design, that's lighting. Look how deep the valleys are. And so this is only the electricity use, it's only the fan power, it's only the good lighting controls, but the effect is, so the biggest part of the difference of Humber River lies in the fact you're scheduling more efficiently, more effectively than anybody else. So we want to dig a little bit into that. So this is the HVAC spaces that are currently 24/7, and it's a very small part of the non-clinical spaces and the ones that need to be. And the system design, as Bob mentioned this morning, was configured, if you like, the number of air handling units related to spaces was designed to enable scheduling. But the bigger part of the non-clinical spaces is switched down at night in accordance with CSA and in accordance with fairly dramatic savings. The really fascinating part is the clinical spaces. So these are all the clinical areas that the hospital is able to switch down, to turn down, again, well within code, during unoccupied periods to achieve those kind of reductions that we're seeing here. So scheduling is a really big deal. And Kurt, I'd love your thoughts on, because Bob mentioned this, what was it about the design that made it easier for the hospital to implement scheduling than might otherwise have been the case?
So I think One of the things I would say, Ian, was definitely making sure we when we're designing the air handling systems, we had air handling systems that weren't serving areas that were 24/7 versus areas and programs that could be shut down. So the project specific output spec listed when departments would be running and what the expectations were. One of the key things was it didn't say what the start time and the end time would be, but it would give us a range of number of hours of operating during the day and whether it would operate on the weekends. And so we made sure when grouping spaces together to serve them off the same air handler, that we weren't mixing those types of spaces up. So that was key. And then the second thing is it was making sure that when we zoned areas, we really looked at the architectural planning drawings to look at the departments and then the sub-departments and group those spaces together on the air handling systems where we had volume boxes, basically VAV boxes, or for larger groups of rooms, we'd have these dampers where we were able to group those rooms and shut them off together. And so the advantage of that is, I think, you know, and JCI has done a great job of working with the hospital to figure out what those start and end times were, because we built in all the capability to do that. And really, when people move into the hospital, they figure some of those things out. And that's why it takes time to schedule everything as people get to know each other and figure what is the right time for our department, what time does it run, what time can we shut it up, you know, open it up and run it. But what we did on the infrastructure side, and this was very early in the design, we were looking at those departmental drawings, and when we're laying out our ductwork, laying out the distribution, we made sure that we provided that level of granularity of control. So you could have in a department multiple sub-departments, and then based on those sub-departments, you would be able to cut off airflow, because you might have portions of it that would work 3 hours later than another, and so on and so forth. So our designers are paying a lot of attention to that, and to that level of detail. And so that's the result here, where you can see those huge dips when you're comparing other facilities where that level of attention probably wasn't paid to the clinical planning or the planning aspect of how what actual areas were getting served. Right?
Really helpful. I'm thinking of Amir Gill at Niagara Health that talks about designing for operations. So you're designing the hospital to make it easy to operate.
Right. And you know, the other thing that we did was we looked at rooms and said, well, there's some spaces that are all going to be occupied roughly at the same time, and there's others where you could have real big swings in variable occupancy of spaces that are adjacent to each other, or clinical spaces or clinically intensive spaces. So we provided individual control for those rooms, right? So ORs, you can have huge variability in how they operate, right? And at night, you need to maybe have 1 or 2 ORs operating for emergency department cases, and then you've got scheduled OR surgeries. So making sure we had individual controls in those rooms for pressurization to meet CSA, but you know, an OR is an extreme example, but there are other less acute rooms that we certainly paid that level of attention to make, you know, we didn't just group rooms together, we provided those rooms with individual control as well. So it was that balance to make sure that we could be, you could do this at the end of the day and operate the building effectively. Like I said, lots of credit to JCI and Humber are working through that and implementing the schedule as time went on.
And for older hospitals on the line, not all of this, but a lot of this can be retrofitted into your existing hospitals. Not only can be, but it will have to be, because we have to get to these lower emissions numbers. Grace, any kind of reaction from departments? Are they okay with?
I'll just say, Ian, we've done that on the existing hospitals. We've gone in and done that in some hospitals. We've added those volume dampers. So
yeah, I get that. Grace, any reaction from the departments involved? Is anybody complaining about their air being turned down at certain times?
Not so much. I think our approach is that during the design development, there are a lot of education to the occupants of the building when we develop our PSOS. Lots of user group meetings. So being energy efficient, you know, our vision and our guideline has always been sufficiently communicated to users. And also this kind of communication leads up to like transition periods when we activate the building, their periodical meetings with users to give them instructions about what's going on in the building, what you're going to expect to happen in the building. So I don't think we have a lot of pushback or reaction to this. And also we have set of protocol on our our side. So if we get requests from users to want to operate outside of the hours, or there's a temperature adjustment that's going to be outside of the range by the contract. So we have a process from the hospital side to make sure that that doesn't happen, or if off hours are required, and that can be processed separately instead of having the system run all the time.
So good communication, no surprises.
Yeah.
Amandeep, I'm hoping you're on the line from Vancouver. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry about the background noises if you could hear any. Just taking this call from a lobby. Thanks, Ian. So as Ian mentioned, we looked at the success on Humber's around the metrics on the gas usage of the building, and you could see that one of the reasons why there was the targets on the heating was lower, or the actual consumption on the heating terminal was lower because of these massive heat wheels that were put into this building. So as most of you know, this is 100% outside air systems where the enthalpy wheels had to perform to an exceptional level to get those results. So two of the things that building operators did, and we were that we got the information shared for them, is that those around these heat wheels, there's two main things that are sort of differentiate among other hospitals that we're currently looking at through the greening healthcare research, is that the preheat set on these heat wheels is actually lower because compared to the other hospitals, which actually helps in to maximize the heat wheel operations, because generally those preheats for some odd reasons are set on higher on other hospitals, which doesn't maximize the savings. And similarly, there's another concept that's being followed at this facility, is to recover as much waste heat as you could from the exhaust. And that's kind of done through the cooling coil operations, where the thermal wheel is run at a higher speed, which increases the supplier temperature. And then the cooling coil is used to recover that heat, which is then brought back through the heat recovery chiller and put it back into the system through a heating loop into the system, which again offset the natural gas. So that's kind of an approach. Maximizing the use of the heat wheel is being followed in this facility, which has led to reduction in the natural gas usage substantially. So another key feature, and I'll bring Kurt into the discussion in a second, is around low static pressure ventilation system. And we talked about in a lot of these P3 projects around the spec where there's a recommendation around using higher or lower velocities designed for the ductwork. But in this case, the biggest difference, as you can see, is the operational watts per CFM for these units. It's running at 0.36 watts per CFM. The design is around 0.3, so it's almost half, less than half of the watts per CFM compared to the design operations that these currently units are running at. And this is a significantly lower static pressure you would expect on these units. And I think the contribution, and Kirk can add to this, is just because of this oversized ventilation system that's been designed in this hospital is part of that original design intent. And which is what's been helping hospital to achieve those substantial lower fan power reduction numbers.
Yeah, we'll come back to Kurt in just a moment on all of this. And look, Kurt, if you could summarize what were the big deals, and within that, what were the challenges in moving things through. But the other features you picked up, Andy. Yeah.
Yeah. So just again, this is just a graphical analysis of how the heat wheel operates in this building. So what you see in this red line is the set point. It is minus 10 degrees C. Your green line is your outside air temperature, and your blue is your preheat temperature. So when the outside air, when it's basically telling you, the graph is telling you, is that as you see the circles, is that the preheat is trying to maintain the minus 10 degrees C going into the wheel. And as the temperature, outside air temperature drops below minus 10, the preheat comes on, and which kind of brings the temperature, or keeps the set point at minus 10, which helps when you keep the preheat temperature at such a lower temperature, it helps you maximize the thermal wheel efficiencies, and helps you maximize the operations of the thermal wheel. So which is kind of what you're seeing in the results of the lower gas in the heating season in this hospital.
And I think you told me, Amandeep, that many many of the hospitals you look at, that preheat temperature is set at plus 3 or 4 or 5 degrees.
Yes, that is true, and that's what's we're currently doing, working with other hospitals in the greening healthcare research, is that a lot of the hospitals have set those pre-temperature too high, and there's no clear direction to hospital what should be the right set point for these. And in this case, we can see a perfect example that within that within Ontario, this pre set point is working well for this hospital. Other observations that we noticed, and there's still, as we talk about it, as the operator is currently working on optimizing this project further, is around static pressure or static supplier temperature reset. So in this case, you could see that the 16 is your set point, and your blue is your supplier temperature, and your green is your outsider temperature. There's currently the supplier temperature is following the outsider pattern, so which means there is a further opportunity within the system controls that you can reset the static supplier temperature to be controlled based on the load downstream. So which again will be further improved as JCI and the team sort of work on making this hospital even a better hospital that's currently right now. So when this last piece on the data analysis is, this is the graph that's comparing the gas consumption on for the whole year for the two hospitals. The Humber River Hospital is in the blue, and one of another Ontario P3 hospitals, similar vintage, is in the red, and outsider temperature is light red in this case. So you can see clearly how the summer usage and even the winter use gas usage of Humber is drastically lower compared to a similar P3 hospital. And that is one of the attributes to this success story around Humber, is to kind of achieve those substantially lower gas usage in this building and maintain it over the year.
That's great. So Kurt, let me, thanks for that overview, Amity. That's really helpful. With that, these are what we see as being the big features that we can draw the connections directly to the energy numbers that have been appearing through this. Kurt, from all of this, which were the most challenging? Which were the things that you think had the biggest impact? Which are the things that you've been able to replicate in other hospitals?
I would say that, you know, one of the things the CSA 317.2 standard requires us to do is have minimum air changes per hour in spaces, and maintain that at all times when spaces are occupied. And so if you've got departments in hospitals like the inpatient areas or the emergency department that's 24/7, and you're maintaining those high air changes per hour, you end up consuming a lot of fan energy. And so in traditional healthcare facilities, fan energy is a significant consumer of electrical energy. And so when we looked at the hospital, we looked at those areas that where we were consuming a lot of energy and targeted those and tried to reduce them. And reducing fan energy through oversizing air handlers and ductwork was definitely what we looked to do. And there are some challenges with that. You have to pay for higher floor-to-floor heights. You have to pay for taller mechanical rooms to be able to fit those larger air handlers in, slightly more square footage. And I think the payback number was about 7 years on Humber to be able to do that. I will say the one nice thing about these features are, it's not something that someone can go mess around with later. Once you build it in, it's there for life. It's not like an operator can go and reduce the size of ductwork or the size of the air handler, so you get that benefit. Not that operators would go do that, but it's just something that's built into the building. You do it from day one, and the payback is, is significant over the life of the building. And we've replicated that in just about every project we've done after that. And we've taken that element and actually applied it to even some projects where we go and do retrofit work and say, you know what, let's just increase that instead of going by the traditional model. This is a healthcare facility. We are running this 24/7, and we're going to be running at higher air changes per hour. In those particular cases, let's oversize those air handling units to get some payback, as well as oversize the ductwork where we can, and even in existing areas. And not always possible, but we look for those opportunities because we know there's real savings, as we've seen in Humber, on being able to do that. So that I would say is one big thing. The other thing Amandeep touched on is, in our effort to oversize our air handling units, to reduce static pressure, we basically slowed down the velocity of that air that's running through over the enthalpy recovery wheels. And basically what that did was increase the efficiency of those enthalpy recovery wheels to far more than the traditional numbers that you would see. So we went from a 77% to, north of 85 to 90%. In fact, paying no energy penalty for having 100% outside air effectively. So that has been, it's not something we've replicated necessarily in other hospitals. We certainly have in certain departments. So, emergency departments and ORs being an example of where we've definitely taken advantage of that in many other projects as well. And in today's environment with COVID, it seems like a no-brainer to go down that route. Right, because you don't pay the energy penalty, and that's kind of the point. You can get the benefit of high ventilation rates without paying that energy penalty.
Let's touch on a couple of the other big features of the hospital. This fascinated me when we got the trend logs from the hospital. So we have a Lutron lighting control system in here. The installed lighting, because at the age of the hospital, it was installed as fluorescent. It was efficient fluorescent lighting, but we weren't yet into the age of LED. And the recordings we're seeing here, so 1 watt per square foot of installed lighting, the actual operational lighting, even including both the parkade and the interior lighting, never went above 0.4 watts per square foot. So this has been an exceptionally well-controlled lighting system. And when we play those numbers through, we're running at something like 25% of the actual load factor of the lighting running over time. So lighting controls have been a big deal. And Grace, very briefly, I'm guessing the occupants, apart from Barbara complaining this morning that her lights go out when she's there late at night, generally this has been well received by everybody.
Yeah, that's right. I think similar to the HVAC schedule, there has been significant communication with users, and as well, the system is highly automated and is synchronized with the occupancy schedule in general. So in a lot of cases, you don't really notice, and in some of offices, light turns on as soon as you enter because of the sensor. So this has been very well received. It's part of life in the building. So we don't really have a lot of complaints.
And it has a big impact, as we saw, on the electrical profile and also on the electricity consumption. Let's get on to the glass, because the glass fascinates everybody. So we've got, and Alex, I'd love your thoughts on this. What was the decision process by which, as the developer, you went towards smart glass? And then Grace, how well has that been received by the people actually using the facility?
So for this one, at the beginning, there was a little bit of concern because this is new, and in terms of privacy, a lot of people just cannot get the head around it in terms of, people going to be able to see me. So we have to do a lot of education with the users and do demonstration to see, this actually, you can see out, but people can't really see you. And I think this has been quite well received now by the users as well, because they, at the beginning, during the design, to also address people's concern about privacy, I think the constructor actually helped us to put railings around to have a curtain in case people are not mentally comfortable with it. But now this has been well received, and now we're getting requests to tint the glass based on patient comfort. So it has been very welcomed by the users.
And Alex, what was that decision process from your standpoint?
Yeah, so it is an interesting one. As you say, there's been quite a lot of interest in it. Certainly, on other projects, other plenary projects, honestly, around the world, there's a lot of people are considering it, really based on the success at Humber. I wasn't involved at the time. It was obviously quite early in the design construction process. But I do understand that the sort of the original business case for it took into account replacement of in-window blinds and solar shades, and so that was offset by putting in this smart glass, and obviously the economics along with that. The replacement of those elements sort of offset the initial capital costs, as well as reduce maintenance and life cycle costs throughout the duration of the project, because in window blinds and things are notoriously, they can be finicky and require maintenance, and then not to mention the energy costs as well. So it was really seen as a win-win-win amongst all the parties at the time. And it's difficult to pinpoint exactly all of the economic gains that have been seen by the various parties, but as I say, it's been really, I would say, uniformly seen as a success, and something that's being considered or put in a number of other projects.
Good to hear. So Alexander, Kurt, Grace, again, thanks for taking the time out to walk us through this from three quite different perspectives. As soon as Amandeep gets back from Vancouver, his job one is to get this all documented into the white paper, which will present a little bit of context, but mostly the data and the information which we are designing to be useful to hospitals in the pipeline. So you can pick up on the concepts, the design concepts, the operational experience here, and use that to, again, leapfrog Humber River. There's a prize out there for the first one to get even better numbers than there, because it's it's the most productive competition in the world. And congratulations to the new standard that's been set there. So Amandeep putting the project together. This is Grace's connection here, and Alexander and Kurt are really easy to find. So thank you to this panel.